Hi everyone, welcome to a very impromptu Broken Meeple preview video. Yes, this is not to do with In the Hall of the Mountain King. This is instead going to be a first impressions preview video of The Fall of the Mountain King. This is a game by Burnt Island Games on Kickstarter right now, designed by Adam Dalton, and the idea is that I got to play it finally on Monday evening, in fact, so literally I'm doing this video the day after, where they taught me the game on Tabletop Simulator. I got to meet Sean, who's involved with the kind of marketing and communication side of things, as well as involved with the Kickstarter, but also got to play with the designer himself, and they taught me the game via Tabletop Simulator. I knew pretty much nothing about the game going in. In fact, I haven't even played this yet. This has been on my shelf of shame for the last 2 weeks, and finally on Wednesday I intend to get this played. But yeah, I knew nothing about this game other than the fact that it had trolls and gnomes. That was pretty much the deal, because I don't pay attention to a huge amount of Kickstarters these days. I'm trying to save a little bit of money. But I got to play it, and I just want to give you my thoughts on it. Now, this is a preview, but I'm still going to give a current rating out of 10 based on my first impressions. You know me, I tell it how it is. So I'm going to label everything that I know and, you know, pros and cons that I can think of about the game. Again, based on one play, so, you know, be wary of that, okay? So, what exactly is the game? Well, the idea is that this In the Hall of the Mountain King, which was very popular since 2019, was effectively the sequel to this one, if you're talking about chronological order, because here the trolls are kind of enslaved and they're doing work and they're collecting resources and that, whereas in The Fall of the Mountain King, this is essentially when the gnomes are invading the lands of the trolls, and so you have your own troll clan, and you are trying to fend them off while trying to get honor points based on fulfilling certain objectives, by getting reputation with many of the different tribes, and also being kind of like almost a bit like how Vikings want to go to Valhalla. It's a bit like that. You kind of want to be first in line to not only knock out gnomes, but when they eventually breach and start swarming you, you want to be first in line to get killed, because it's like, I died in battle, that's a good thing. So the idea is that in this game, the gnomes attack and they overwhelm the trolls, and then this one follows on from that. It's an area control game, a very mean area control game, although I say mean, you can get in each other's faces, and you will get in each other's faces, so you gotta be knowledgeable of that. But it's an area control game, are you that surprised, really? The idea is that you have a board map, and you are trying to use your various trolls to control different caverns, attack the gnomes when they start showing up, but you don't necessarily know how powerful they are, so you've got to find that out in advance, or take a leap of faith in a sense. But you're not really friendly with the other troll tribes, so you're kind of fending for those areas as well off them. You're trying to control it off them, but you can score points by controlling different areas, and of course you can, score points by getting rid of the gnomes. Now, the way your turn sequence works is this. I would describe it similar to the like card laying mechanic that games like Honshu, Hokkaido, and Walking in Province did. I'm sure there's other games that have done similar to this, but those are the three that come to my mind immediately, where you have these, what they're called ancestry cards, and you draft out 4 of them to start start each round, and basically you'll get given 4, you'll pass them to the left until you end up with 3 of them. And the idea is that you place them down in a grid, effectively. I mean, it's in front of you, so you haven't got the grid. It's basically on the cards. But a 6x6 grid is what you're limited to. And you place them in such a way that you're revealing these icons. And the icons correspond to the different actions you can do. You have to cover at least 1 square of a card before, in order for it to be a legal placement, and there are certain other restrictions based on the symbols. But what you're trying to do is build up your ancestry by putting the symbols in such a way so that when you activate them during the main phase of the round, you get to do multiple actions, or maybe one action that's really strong. And so you've got that tense decision of trying to think, well, hang on, if I place it here, then I'm gonna have to I'm gonna get really good, strong, like influence action, but then I'm not doing too well on bolster. I'm kind of running out of shields here. I could do with something else to facilitate that. Depending on how many barrels you've got in your ancestry and what round it is, you'll have a certain amount of actions that you can do, and so players will have different amounts to do in each round potentially. But what you do is that you spend 1, and then you get to do either 1 strong action or 2 weak actions. 2 weak actions involves you being able to do multiple different things, or even 2 of the same action if you really want. But what you do is that you place a token on your ancestry to activate that particular symbol. And once you've covered it, that's it. You can't activate that square again. By doing a weak action, you can only activate a single icon of that. If you do a strong action though, you can activate all the icons in a particular grouping. So let's say I've got several of these influence icons in a big row or a big cluster, I could activate the whole lot with one strong action. I'll only get to do influence that turn, but it will be a good solid influence turn. In addition, if you are able to create essentially like a bridge of your tokens on your ancestry, then it allows you to do some cool shenanigans where by activating a specific group of symbols in one cluster, you might be able to leapfrog some of your tokens into another cluster of the same symbol. It's hopefully my Tabletop Simulator footage is like showing it in more detail, but basically your ancestry is one big puzzle that you are manipulating all the time in order to take your turn. The actions themselves I'm not going to go into too much detail over, but they essentially allow you to influence these trolls, which you can get into your tribe, and these trolls have special abilities as well as get you votes and reputation with the various tribes. You can move your trolls around the map. You can bolster by adding more trolls from your supply onto the map. It's basically like you would expect from an area control. And you can also activate what's called a gnome wheel. So I think that was what we called it anyway. And it's essentially kind of like it's a weird little action. You get to do some of your like previous actions that you couldn't do before, like bolster and move, but based on how far you move around this little rondelle. When you go over certain bits, you trigger either victory points or a breach by the gnomes. But the main reason you do that action is so that you can look at the tokens and the cards for the gnomes, so you can see how powerful certain gnome armies are and where they're likely to invade at the end of a round. So that's kind of the crux of a turn sequence. At the end of the round, you score based on controlling different provinces, different caverns, and in the third round, you'll score based on certain symbols on your ancestry, what reputation you've got with the various tribes as first, second, and third place scoring, basically. And you'll also score for these great halls, which is kind of like little bits on the board where if you surround the caverns around it, you can score more points. And there's various ways to score points in this game, so there is definitely some differing strategies that you can do. The box says 60 to 90 minutes, and I think it's going to depend heavily on player count, because it goes from 1 to 5 players. There's going to be a solo mode. I know nothing about that, so don't even ask. But you've got basically a board for 2 and 3 players and a board for 4 and 5 players. I would be a little bit hesitant about playing this with 4 or 5. You could convince me to play it with 4 if people I trust do not AP. 5 I just think is too much. I get the feeling that 5 was just put on there because you had a board for 4 players and you figured, oh well, why not, it will sell more copies. Because what can happen is some of these turns can go on quite long if you're doing a couple of weak actions that have got a lot of ramifications, like controlling certain areas or killing off gnomes, or particularly that gnome wheel. That gnome wheel's got a good few steps to it, so doing multiple gnome actions can mean quite a long turn for that person. But you've also got the potential downtime of people thinking very hard about their ancestry, because do not underestimate how tricky that puzzle is. Not only deciding where to put your card during the drafting phase, because not only have you got to pick one of the cards in your hand, you've also got to decide where is it going to go on your rotten grid. But then when you're doing your actions, you're thinking, oh, should I influence now? Maybe I should move. Well, if I bolstered and I'm ready for that, but then that breach token's over there. If they come through in a minute, that means I'm going to get hit with the gnomes. I don't want to lose my trolls at the moment, but then I can only do it here. All right, well, where can I bolster on my board? Well, I can do it on this cluster. I could do this weak action over here. There's a lot of options, which is great. This game really does give you a lot of options on your turn. But if you're prone to AP, you are going to notice that some people are going to freeze up over what they can do. In terms of ease of play, it was actually pretty easy to get on with, actually. It's a mid-weight game for sure, and it's very thinky. This is not a light game. Anybody who claims this is light is really underestimating this game's weight. Seriously, it is mid-weight. I wouldn't call it heavy, though. There's definitely a lot of thinking you can do. There's some meaty decisions, and it's definitely got a lot of depth to it, but the rules themselves actually weren't that complicated. The actions are pretty straightforward to understand how they work. The gnome wheel is probably the most weirded one in the lot, but moving trolls is pretty straightforward. You effectively kind of move them from one cavern to another, but if you've got a chain of caverns controlled by your tribe, you can effectively go all the way along the chain to the next tunnel, so you can do some pretty long distance moves. Bolstering is just adding more trolls to particular caverns, and influence is just moving a marker up a troll to say I've got the most influence with that troll, in the hopes that you will be able to hire that troll into your tribe at the end of a round, depending on what the opponents do with these trolls. So as the rules were being explained to me, I actually found myself going, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. That makes sense. Not saying it's necessarily intuitive, but when you get explained the rules, even though there is a bit of a rules dump at the start of the game that you are going to have to deal with, I didn't find it too complex, particularly as there were some things that were familiar. As I said, the whole Ancestry thing is basically laying cards on stuff like Honshu and Hokkaido and Walking in Province. If you've played those games, you're already familiar with that mechanic, and I'm sure there's other games I haven't thought of that fit that criteria. People know what area control is. I mean, the gist of area control is control areas. What do you need to know? Really, it just comes down to working out how the gnomes work, and that's definitely the more fiddly part of the game. The understanding how the breaches work when they happen, like what's the priority order for like gnomes coming in through a certain tunnel. It's like, well, hang on, so they go into here, but then if that's already got gnomes in it, then they've got to go along their chain to the weakest cavern. Weakest cavern, where's the weakest cavern? There's two in there, one in there, two in there, one in there. I have suggested that they give us a reference card to illustrate how breaches and the invasion phase work. I think that would be very useful for players to just have that to hand to read in front of them. Or they certainly need to have a very clear thing on the back of the rule book. They've got to have something that explains that process very well, very clearly, otherwise that could flummox a few people. But other than that, the reference aid that we had on TTS was easy enough to show the icons. In fact, to be quite frank, I actually didn't even know it was there for half the game. I saw it and it's like, oh, that's a reference aid. Oh, sweet. I never felt I needed to look at it. I didn't have to ask, well, what does that symbol mean? Or what does that symbol imply? Nah, the graphic design is simple as anything, really. Really, the reason this is midweight is just because there's quite a fair few rules to get, to learn, but it's mainly just how meaty this game is, and that gives us a nice way to move on to tactics and strategy, where there's definitely a lot of options. I mean, I was really having to think hard about, where am I going to send these trolls? What are my opponents going to do? And this is very interactive. I mean, when you control areas from your opponents, you are effectively not killing their trolls, which is cool, because I would have been a little bit like, oh, you've killed my trolls, that's not great. No, you just simply block their VPs, which is fine. You could just move your trolls somewhere else or bolster them with more trolls. But the real reason that they can stitch you up is the breaches. If a breach happens, then wherever that token is that goes around the side of the board, it essentially brings more gnomes on, and these will outright kill trolls. So there was plenty of times, because I was focusing a lot on that gnome wheel, that I was sending the breach token to their various locations and going, gnomes, there's a few trolls over here, you might want to kill them, come on, get lovely dindins. And then they come in, they kill some of their trolls and knock out some of their VPs for controlling locations. It was a legit strategy. In fact, to be honest, in the first round of the game, I was quite a distance ahead. I started off with a really good lead, and then that got whittled down in wave 2. And then that got eroded in wave 3 and I lost. So yeah, I had a very good strong early game. Unfortunately, it didn't translate to a long game. But it didn't matter. I lost the game, and I was still happy enough that I made, I knew what decisions I made badly, but I also knew what I did well as well, and I felt like, cool, this was one way to play the game. I'm now going to try something different next time. You cannot turtle, and you can't multiplayer solitaire. It is basically impossible. If you turtle in this game, you're going to lose. You've got to get on the offensive with those gnomes. You've really got to start taking them out, otherwise they're going to mess you over like crazy. But then also, a lot of the troll abilities and the ways you get points involve you being a bit more aggressive. You really don't want to turtle. And multiplayer solitaire, no, you are constantly caring about the opponents. This is definitely a very interactive Euro game. So Immersion, yeah, it's fine. For a Euro game, it's pretty good, but other than that, I mean, it's, you got cool pictures of trolls, and there's definitely a lot of like authentic looking like trolls with their abilities and what they do. But yeah, I mean, the theme is fine. It's not like pasted on, but I wouldn't say it was dripping either, especially when you think about those ancestry tiles. Longevity is going to be pretty sweet for this, I think, as well, because normally area control games kind of suffer on this one, but here it's going to come down to the fact that you've got very different paths to victory. I mean, your ancestry building is going to differ every time, how you approach it and what you actually get in terms of those cards, and you might focus on particular actions, like I'm going to focus a lot on influence, now I'm going to focus on the gnome wheels, maybe I'm just going to focus entirely on moving and bolstering my trolls. So what if a gnome kills me a few times? I got so many forces, I don't care. But where the longevity really comes into play in a good way is player scaling and the trolls themselves. Player scaling, much as I said that 4 and 5 is going to be a bit of a longer affair, the board does scale very nicely because you've got the 2 different sides for 2 to 3 player and 4 to 5, and it will scale, I think, pretty well at 2 player. But the longevity is really from the trolls. The trolls are one of the best aspects in this game. And when I say the trolls, I mean specifically the chieftains, or the champions, I think they're called actually. Basically, you start off with the champion of your own. So everybody's got a unique champion with a special ability, always good, a little bit of player differentiation. And the idea is that a few trolls, I think, might be based on players, but we had 4 in this case. We had 4 trolls lined up, different abilities, and you've got wave 1, 2, and 3 trolls, so they get progressively better as they go along, and eventually turn into endgame scoring trolls. But what you do is that basically you put the influence, you use the influence action to move up the track on each particular troll, and if you are at the top, not only do you get the reputation for the clan, but you also take the troll itself, and you get another champion troll in your thing, and it has its own special ability. I lost track of how many there were, but there was definitely double-digit worth of trolls in each set. And stretch goals might mean that you'll get more as the Kickstarter goes on, but there was definitely enough to have a good amount of variety for the trolls. Like, different trolls will come out each game, different scoring markers can be on the various tribes. So yes, in one game it's 12 points if you control the mountain clan, but then in another game it might only be worth 6, and you're like, not too fussed. So those will change every game. But the trolls themselves, the different combinations that you can make with their various abilities, and there's definitely a good variation as to what they do. It's not just simply, oh, this is just a blatant copy of that, but you changed it from stone to iron, for example, like some games do. No, these abilities are pretty distinct, and they're pretty powerful. I mean, some of them you got to think a little bit harder outside the box as to how you'll get them to work, and not every troll is going to suit your particular playstyle. But for example, I managed to hire quite a small army of trolls, and I had one that put layers next to each other, so that like really expanded my ability to move across the board. I had a troll that said once every wave when you bolster, like get another troll, you get to put a troll into every neighbouring cavern that doesn't have gnomes in it. Considering I spent wave 2 pretty much getting slaughtered because of bad plays I was making. I was killing a lot of gnomes, but I wasn't really getting the way that the breaches worked, and I lost quite a few trolls to that. But, you know, I got some points, but yeah, it's like, I got barely any forces, and my ancestry didn't have a lot of shields on it. So with that troll champion, I was able to really get a lot of stuff back onto the board and mitigate my weakness. So I rambled on quite a bit there, but hopefully from first impressions you've got a good feel of what the game is like from, you know, I like to think that I am telling you how it is. I'm not saying, this is not an advertisement to say, go back the game immediately, you must pledge, you must buy now. And no, you've got to make that decision yourself. All I'm saying is, I think it's worthy of a good 8 out of 10 at the moment. The duration I can't talk much about, and in the aesthetics I can't talk about the components much, but I thought it looked good from an art perspective. Now, I am a bit concerned about the analysis paralysis level for some of the actions in the game. This is definitely one that I think if you're prone to analysis paralysis, you're going to suffer a little bit, particularly if you decide to play this with 4 or 5 players. That is a concern, but I think it worked really well as a 3-player game, and by the way the boards look from scaling, I think it would work with 2 players as well, so I think this will scale very nicely. I'm keen to see where this goes from here, and certainly when I get a production copy on its retail release, I'll be glad to give it a proper review then. You know, blitz or detail, we'll have to see. And all I can say is give the Kickstarter a look. I think as I record this on the 15th of June 2021, it's got about a week left. So go check it out, consider what I've said, and see if any of the things I've mentioned appeal to you, or maybe they put you off the game. As I say, it's up to you to make the decision as to whether you want to pledge for a game or not. And like I say, I hope this video was useful and informative to you, as well as maybe being a little bit entertaining. But as I say, I don't know how entertaining it is to watch me just sit at the table and talk at you for a bit. So that's it for me. Until next time, if you like the video, please leave a thumb up for it, a like. It takes a millisecond and it means the world to me to know that people appreciate the content. Don't forget that this video is also sponsored by Xatu.co.uk. Perhaps you're considering grabbing the original game in the Hall of the Mountain King. If so, visit Xatu.co.uk, see if they got it in stock, and if so, save yourself 5% on your basket using my code in the description. It's all good to save money while we're making such large collections, as you can see. If you want to check out some more content on this channel, then recently I did a Blitz review of the Ticket to Ride 15th Anniversary Edition, the Europe version that Days of Wonder have just released. Or maybe you're a Spirit Island fan fan and you want to know about what my favourite spirits in the game are, well, me and Jonah from One Pit Wonder did a top 5 list where on live stream we talked about our favourite spirits. Until next time, take care, and remember, whether you back it or not, it's still only a game. Bye for now.